Cool. So welcome to the April 2019, my word, time flies meetup. Everyone should be, we've got the broadcasting channel. April 2019, my word, time flies meetup. Okay. So quickly, is there an echo here on that? We've got the broadcasting channel. Okay, maybe they're not. Okay, so with that, okay, so we've got a great speaker, a 3-time MVP, might I just add. And how many times have you, I always see you on the SharePoint Saturday speaker circuit. Like, how many SharePoint Saturdays have you done?
Oh boy. I know I've been in Toronto, sorry, in New York 3 times in the last 3 years.
Wait. No, someone has the video playing in the background.
Is that me or?
No, I think it's somebody else. So while it's setting up, so Peter, I prepared a deck that I'm actually going to be going through. So as I go through it, if you want to ask questions, then let's do that.
Yeah, that sounds great. On that, so it's a 12:16. So let's give it 2 minutes. People are watching this on are watching this through the YouTube. We've got somebody from Virginia. Okay, Ivan, come on in. Is that me or?
Yes.
This is paused.
You need to mute this so it's not playing. There we go.
Okay, very cool.
Because what's happening is you're saying and it's coming right through the video.
Okay, I did put it on pause. Okay, that sounds good. All right, technical hitches here, you know, but I suppose that's show business for you. Right, okay, so you've how many times did you say you've been speaking at SharePoint Saturdays in New York?
In New York 3 times, I would say that probably good 30 times in the last few years, all around North America.
Right. Okay. My word. Okay. Done anything overseas? I know Canada. I know I'm saying that from New York. Have you done anything non-American, non-Canadian?
Not yet, but probably planning on this summer. There's some nice destinations in Europe. I'm planning on hitting.
I saw that in London actually. I think it's the last week in May actually.
Yeah, there's that. There's Lisbon. There's the European SharePoint conference happening in Prague later in the year.
Right. Right. Okay. Very quiet. Last year I spoke in Ahmedabad, SharePoint Saturday in Ahmedabad. That was the 4th one.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was actually really well attended actually on this. Okay, so we'll give it a few more minutes on this. So Teams we're talking about Teams and productivity. Teams is probably what now 2 years old from what I know it came out about 2 years ago.
Just turned 2, yes.
Yes, it's turned 2. So it's like a toddler, I suppose. And I have to say, you know, it really has improved. You know, we in our company we're using it a tremendous amount, and I think almost every client that we're using it with Office 365, you know, Teams seems like a natural progression. It doesn't require much training, and you know they can, and the adoption rate is actually pretty good. Actually, it's actually very, very good, and there's none of this resistance. It's like, oh wow, this is so good to actually work, and it works on the phones, iPads, and everything.
Right.
So on that note, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Excellent. So hi everyone, nice to meet you. My name is Haniel. So I'll be talking to you today specifically about Microsoft Teams in the aspect of project management. So how do you use it for managing a project more efficiently? I'm just going to switch over my deck. You able to see my presentation?
Yes.
Awesome. Great. So a little bit about myself. So Peter already mentioned I'm a 3 times Microsoft MVP. I do extensive speaking. I've been working in the consulting space for over 15 years now. And recently I released a book called Agile Office 365, which you can get it on Amazon, you can get it on Apress, and at the end of this workshop, I'm actually going to be raffling a copy of the book, sponsored by Soho Dragon. And then a bit about myself also is I like efficiency. I like to keep things simple. People like to say sometimes that I'm lazy, and why not? If the computer can do something for me, why should I have to do it manually? So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. It's not just Microsoft Teams and go through every feature. I will introduce the features about it, but as a project manager or as an agile project lead, how can I use Microsoft Teams to work more efficiently? That's the goal. Towards the end, if you have any questions, I know Ivan is going to be collecting information, but definitely encourage you to come forward with any additional questions you might have. So when we talk about project management or project leadership in general, there are essentially three main pillars that we as project leads are concerned with. The first one is communication, and this is something that we do day in and day out. We have our clients, we have our project team, we have other stakeholders. We need to be in touch with them to make sure that everything is running as planned. Then there's the collaboration piece. There is some sort of output from the project, whether it's some sort of intellectual property or documentation. It is something that we need to collaborate on as a team. And then the third part is notification and reporting. And so as a project manager, as a project lead, it's great to communicate and be in touch, but what's even better is being able to get my reports and my information to me in a more automated fashion, so I don't have to start hunting for information. So when we talk about forms of communication, what do we talk about? So on the screen, you can see there's a number of common types of communication or mediums. So whether it's the typical weekly status report, when you take meeting minutes after every meeting, you have your decision logs, change logs, action logs, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all things that you are capturing on a regular basis, and you want to be able to manage them properly. And there are studies that show that about 80% of the time spent by a project manager is spent in some form of communication or another. Now, the same study also shows that if communication is well performed and it's done the right way, you're actually at a much higher chance of succeeding. So this is nothing about Microsoft Teams or any other tool you're using, but it's just to say that proper communication is really critical to the success of a project. Communication happens at different levels. So depending on who you are and where you are in the project ladder or in the company ladder, you may have to communicate with different stakeholders at different levels and provide different types of information. In terms of collaboration, so the key here is, and I love to say this one sentence, is the right information in the right format to the right person at the right time. And this is really speaking to a lot of different things, is making sure that people get the right access to their information, making sure that they're able to actually work with the document. So if they need to modify something or copy it or share it with somebody else, and then giving them just enough information they need to work on so they don't access everything else. Now, if we do a reality check, and I'm sure if I would ask people on the call, a question today is, how many of you feel like you're doing a stellar job in communicating and in keeping all of your documents well organized so that everybody is working with the latest copy and there's no duplication? I think we're going to realize that not all of us are following it.
Could be improved.
Yes, yeah. So document duplication is usually the biggest offender for most of us. Poor access control. So you give access and everybody can access everything. Finding information. So people love having a good search tool, and usually the biggest pain point when I talk to people who use SharePoint is, what is the biggest problem you have with SharePoint? The most common cause is they can't find their information, which is interesting because the whole purpose of an enterprise content management system is to make finding more easily. So organizing your content is definitely a critical piece of it. And then lack of consistency between projects. So, if you have a project lead going from one project to another, one of the most time-consuming things is realizing that things are not where you expect them to be. And then you'll start going on a little bit of a wild goose chase to find what you're looking for. Not sure if I've hit on any notes that anybody has experienced. I know, Peter, you mentioned that you've seen it, but others as well.
Yeah, like one of the things I do like about Teams, about the notification, it gets stuff out of email and it gets all of that project communication into a channel. which is great because it's searchable. So therefore, there's a lot less of trying to find emails around.
Right. Exactly. So when we start talking about notification and reporting, so as I mentioned before, one of the nice things as a PM is you need to provide updates. So the status report, which needs to include your action items and what was discussed last meeting and what is your budget and your timeline and your scope. Are you on track? Are you off track? So all this information needs to come from somewhere. Often it's multiple systems. You might be using Azure DevOps for your scope to keep on track. You might be using your time tracking systems. You might be keeping another system for billing. So you have all this, the whole plethora of systems. And then when it comes time to doing your reporting, now you start hunting for all this information.
So Haniel, yeah. Here's a question for you on the tasks. Like what I quite like about a task tracker is that I can assign you a task and you get notified, and then you can actually probably say, and you often get notified in your email, and you can hit reply in that email, and it goes back into that task. So you get like a body of communications with a task.
That's right.
Planner doesn't do that. Is that correct?
So I'll get to it in a little bit when I start talking about Planner and how Planner fits into Microsoft Teams. It is actually a part of the whole family that makes up your plan, or sorry, your team. It is a part that you can actually track your all of your plans directly in Teams, so which is nice. So when you're saying getting back into it, you can actually see your whole planner board and view all that information.
All right. Okay, great.
Yep. So progress on development and testing, feedback from external people. So all this information, it would be nice as a project lead. Again, I would say that I don't like to have to go manually and pick up all this information, to have it all brought back into me and to have it nicely organized so my reporting becomes easier and I don't have to start going to all these different systems to get to it. So that's as a project lead are the things that most of us would be concerned with. So let's talk about a little bit about Microsoft Teams specifically, and then look at how the tool can help us achieve those goals. So I'm going to start with a bit of an overview. I'm not sure for those on the call if there are some who've never heard of Microsoft Teams, used Microsoft Teams. Some of you might be using it. Good for you, and it's amazing, and it just continues to evolve over time. So I'll just take it through a quick overview. So Microsoft Teams, think of it as a bit of a dashboard. It brings together information from a number of sources. It provides you a communication stream. So your conversations now are moving out of email, which is still the most common medium for communication today, for pretty much every organization, I would say globally almost. The nice thing about Microsoft Teams is that you have the conversations there. If somebody is not privy to a certain conversation that might have happened in email, they would never know that that conversation has taken place. If, on the other hand, you're managing a project in Microsoft Teams and somebody joins the project at a later date, or they just missed an email, with the conversations, you can always come back to it and see everything that happened. It also allows a very rich integration with other systems. So as I mentioned before, if you're looking at Azure DevOps to keep track of your development progress, or financial reporting, or if you're using other external systems like Salesforce, or you're doing your, you mentioned, Peter, Planner, but if somebody decides to use, for example, Trello or Asana to do their task management. So you can bring all of that information. And it's nice because one of the things that often as project managers we waste time on is task switching. We have to go to all these different systems to get to the data we need. This is nicely bringing everything into one place. Also, what I love about it is the fact that it's mobile ready. So anybody who's using Microsoft Teams, you can just download the application for free on your iOS or Android, and you can do almost everything that you would normally do in your desktop application directly on your mobile device. So imagine that you're on a train, you've got time to kill. You're looking at your conversations and somebody's mentioning you or mentioning a document. You click on the document, it opens up inside of Microsoft Teams, all of that in one unified experience. Again, you don't have to go between all these applications. So very, very powerful in that respect. If you think about Microsoft Teams, every team is made up of essentially 5 components. We have and Peter already alluded, we have Planner, and that is a unstructured task management application or app, which allows you to create tasks, assign them to various users. You can group them by what are called boards, and then you can just report on them. They're unstructured in a sense that no task is related to another. So there's no dependency, there's no percent complete. You're literally just marking something as started or not started, in progress, and completed. And you can put some notes and some information about it. That is available with every plan that you create, or so with every Microsoft team you create. Then there's Skype. It is not the Skype for Business, but rather it is based on the consumer version of Skype. It has a much better video engine and overall experience, and I will talk about that in a little bit. And it allows you to do the typical communications you'd be performing with Skype. So whether it's peer-to-peer or with groups of people. Office 365 Group. So this is where all of your security is managed, access to your team, and also it's based on a SharePoint site. So that's where all of the documents for the team are being stored and managed. The nice thing about it is, if you want to give access to people to access your documents directly, they can go to the SharePoint site, to the Office 365 Group directly. They don't actually have to go through Teams if they want to. Then we have OneNote, which is it's a free-form note-taking tool. Again, very powerful on its own and integrated within Teams. So every team you create will have its own OneNote. You can also then have every channel have its own OneNote or share the parent one. And then there's connectors. And this is really a whole ecosystem of itself, where you have literally hundreds of connectors with different systems that allow you to bring in information. And I'll show you some examples of that very soon. So let's talk about how we can do some of the things with Microsoft Teams. So when we talk about asynchronous communication, it basically means that you may be sending a message to somebody, but that individual is not there to receive the message at the same time. So what are some of the means? You can do peer-to-peer messages, which is the same as instant messaging in Skype or WhatsApp or other applications. Or you can write directly to a channel within a team, and then everybody who's part of that channel can see and can participate in the conversation. Now, something that is very soon going to be released is the concept of private channels. So until now, whenever you create a team, all the channels are open to everyone. So you can lock down a team to be private to certain individuals, but then all the content within that team is shared and available to all the team members. That is going to soon change, where channels are going to become private, or you can make them private, and then only people who are part of that channel can see the content. Question, Peter?
Do you think there could be a bit more? Because with SharePoint, permissions is always a bit of a beast, isn't it?
Yes, it does have a lot of, and there are some implications around the permissions around the channel. There's questions right now that we're trying to answer around, well, if you're a team owner, can you see private channels? And those are the kind of things that we're still, Microsoft is working through. But right. Overall, the whole concept of the private team is important, because imagine that you have a team for a specific department. Let's say it's your IT department. Yeah. There might be some information that is very sensitive, for example, some financial information that you don't want everybody in the IT team to know. That's where you can create a private channel, and whatever you put in that channel will only be available to those individuals.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Rich content. So one of the things that people always like, and it might sound a little bit like gamification, but adding images, adding videos or memes or that kind of information, it just lightens up the work environment a little bit. And it's interesting, actually. One of the first things when we rolled out in a previous organization, Microsoft Teams, that's one thing that we found that users started to play around with from the start. It was a very short adoption curve to start using them, and it made it a bit more fun. So another thing for asynchronous is meeting scheduling. So Microsoft Teams directly interact with Outlook and also with your Skype for Business calendar. So you can actually book a meeting in Skype for Business and you will see it in your Teams and vice versa, so that you can have these kind of meetings happening across the 2 different systems. So again, going forward, if your organization will adopt Microsoft Teams and you're going to start moving away from Skype for Business, what you were doing before in Skype for Business, you can now do directly in Microsoft Teams, or you can book your meetings from Outlook, as you will see soon. Now, emailing channels. So think of a team as a group of people who come together to interact on content. Depending on your needs, so in my particular case, Microsoft Teams is locked down only for productivity. Only my colleagues can interact with the content. But there are scenarios where I want my clients not necessarily to interact with the content, but when they share content with us, I want to make sure that that content ends up in Teams. So you can share an email address for every channel with your clients, and you can say, okay, well, whenever you need to contact somebody in the project, or whenever you're sending out information, please copy this email address. And this way, you're actually making sure that the team is always up to date with client communication. And that's in case somebody might have missed the email or was not on the original chain, they can still find out what happened in that conversation. So that's around asynchronous communication. For real time, as I mentioned before, it has the Skype, the consumer version of Skype built in. On the right-hand side, you can see it's basically a picture of a phone where you can have, today it's up to 9 different video conversations going on at the same time. The quality is again, much better than Skype for Business. They also added a number of new features recently. So for example, you can see the background being blurred. So for a lot of people who are working from a home environment or somewhere where they don't have the privacy, you know, it often happens to me, right? I'm working and my kids are in the background, they're kind of doing funny faces. Not the most professional thing. With background blurring, you're actually able to eliminate that to some degree. As you can see, it still shows you a little bit of the background, but not as much in focus. You can also today or soon be able to put a background image. So in this case, you can see the person and you can see the blurred background. In the future, the whole blurred background will be gone and you'll actually be able to put a static image of an office or something else you want to have there. So again, this is just something to enhance the experience with the audio video. In terms of access and security, so a few things. As I mentioned already, Teams can be either public, which means everybody in the organization can access them, or you can make them private so that only specific individuals who are invited can interact with the content. The channel privacy is something which is going to be coming soon. It's not there just yet. For users, so you can add entire, so not to get too technical, but you can have security groups, and you can actually add an entire group into Microsoft Teams, and it will then know who are all the members of that group and assign them to the team. So this way, it makes the management of the users a little bit easier. Data loss prevention, this is a really important one. So, and you probably hear about it a lot with attempts of theft or people trying to access information or send sensitive information outside of organization. So Microsoft Teams has released some information or an enhancement to Teams where it's able to detect based on policies that are set up in your tenant what is considered to be sensitive information. So things like birthdays, social security numbers, phone numbers, credit card numbers, all of those things can be identified as sensitive information. And if you're trying to type a message and submit it, and there's any sensitive information in it, Microsoft Teams will actually prevent you from doing that. As you can see in here, the red text, it was basically saying that this message has been blocked. It is not actually being submitted.
So can that restrict social security numbers and credit cards?
Yes. So in Office 365, you can configure what are your data loss prevention policies. You can actually teach it certain elements to look for, And if it senses any of those, then it would block the message from coming through. So depending on the region you're in, let's say in England, the postal code is actually different than the Canadian postal code. In the US, you have zip codes. Phone numbers might be different formatted. So you can actually teach it those rules, and then it would know what to look for. Yeah.
Okay.
Then we have integration. So this is something I mentioned a couple of times, and this is probably one of my favorite features in Microsoft Teams, is the ability to bring in all this content with ease, and essentially preventing me from having to go and hunt for information in different places. So that's a very big one. And it's something which is just continuously growing and growing in size. So I think initially when I did this presentation, the number was about 180 connectors. As recent as last week, it's about 240. So a lot of companies are jumping on the bandwagon and realizing that opening up their access to the content and allowing other systems to get to it is really helping productivity, and it's helping them by not losing their clients. And so what you can do is you can add these connectors into two different sections of your site. So there's something called tabs across the top. So if I'm just going to quickly switch to my Microsoft Teams. So here's an example of a team that I belong to. You can see my conversations. There's a file folder. There's a speaker registration, which is, I believe, an actual website. Yeah, so that takes me to an external website. There's a speaker page, which is another website. So I think most of those are, this was set up by one of the workshops, the SharePoint Fest, but most of those are websites. But if I wanted to, and if I had permissions, I can actually go in and create additional connectors. So if I wanted to, I may not have permissions here. Yeah, I don't have permissions to add it, but because I'm a guest, but I could actually go in and add additional tabs for different kinds of content. And then with a couple of configurations, which typically are, what are your credentials? If it's something like, for example, with Planner, as Peter mentioned before, it would have my credentials because it's part of Office 365. And then all I would have to tell it is, for example, which plan do I want to include? The one that comes with that team, maybe another one, and then it's done. Then that tab will go at the top, and then I can access all the information in the canvas. Another thing to look at is something called connectors for the channels. So you can subscribe to information from different data sources. So for example, Twitter. So you can set it up that if there's a tweet, it has a certain handle or it has a certain hashtag, you want to have that tweet go directly to your channel so you can keep track of it. Same thing for Yammer, same thing for other types of information. For example, Visual Studio Team Services are now called Azure DevOps. So as I mentioned before, I don't want to have to go to DevOps to find out what is happening. I can actually bring that information directly into Teams, so it can tell me, hey, there's a build that just failed, and I can then contact the devs and find out what's happening. A lot of these different communications can be fed directly to the channels. Another one is integration with Flow. So anybody who's using Flow, if not, I urge everybody on the phone to have a look at it. I personally am absolutely in love with it, probably as much as Microsoft Teams. It allows you to easily automate data collection, data manipulation, and data distribution through a WYSIWYG interface. So it's very much like building a workflow, giving it a few parameters, and it just runs behind the scenes. And so Microsoft Teams allows you to build these flows so that, for example, when somebody posts a message to a channel, you want to do something with that information. Or maybe there's an email that came in and you wanted to post some of that information to your channel. You want to have some sort of an approval process happening. There's a lot of different things you can do with the data that exists inside of Microsoft Teams by using Microsoft Flow in the background. Then there's something called bots. So those of you who are not familiar with bots, they are what I would like to call semi-intelligent pieces of code that are running to let you interact with the data. So rather than filling out a form, imagine you want to book a flight to another city. So there are bots available, and you can tell them in English. You can write a message saying, I'm looking for a flight from Toronto to New York next Saturday. It's actually able to interpret your natural language and make sense of it and say, okay, so Haniel is looking for flight from YYZ to LGA or JFK on April the 7th. So it's actually able to interpret that information, and then based on that, provide you with different types of options. There's a lot of different bots available for different purposes. You can also build your own bots. But again, this is making the Microsoft Teams even more friendly, because now instead of having to fill out forms, you can just use this bot mechanism to get information. Imagine something like an HR system where you can say, how many vacation days do I have left for the year? It's much easier than no offense to HR, but it's much easier than having to contact HR. They have to go into a system, look up the information, email you back. This is much faster. Team archiving. So often there's questions around, well, what happens if my project is done? I don't want to have a whole plethora of teams just sitting around there. And whenever I search for something, I start finding old information. So you are in fact able to archive teams today. And by archiving, it literally just means that it's taking it offline. It doesn't delete anything. It doesn't remove it. It just means that when you're looking at all of your teams, they're not there for you to interact with. And you can always bring it back if you want to restore it. So that's in a nutshell what Microsoft Teams is. Now let's look at some scenarios as a project manager. How would I use it, or what do I recommend to those who are either adapting Microsoft Teams or have been using it already, and some ways to look at it to improve communication? So the first and foremost thing, get out of email. Email is very old. I am a strong believer that if you are communicating internally within your company and you have Microsoft Teams, there is no justification for using email, full stop. Everything you do in an email, you can do in a Microsoft team. The drawbacks are that, if you're working in email, again, you run the risk of somebody joining the project, and they may not be privy to all the history behind it. So rather than having to catch up with that person and they have to start asking everybody, hey, can you send me information about this or about that? It's all nicely organized in one place. Now, depending on how your organization is structured, by department, functional teams, you probably want to have a different team for every one of your business units where they can organize their content appropriately. Now, things to consider is when you're creating projects and you're managing your teams, there might be some content you want to work with that goes beyond the project lifecycle. So for example, a statement of work, or maybe there's a lessons learned that you want to capture. So here's an example where you could combine your Microsoft team with a flow to say that publishing a lessons learned document, it's in Teams, but maybe what you want to do is you also want to make it available somewhere else so that people can refer back to it at a later date. And you can actually have links to all the lessons learned. Another thing to think about is when you're creating for a project, do you create a team or do you create a channel? So until recently, because you had a limitation where channels always had the same permissions as a team, it was very important to think about it, because sometimes you may have a team that represents a client, and then every channel would represent a project, which works great if everybody on that team has access to all the data. But what if there's a scenario, and I've faced a scenario in the past, where you might have a team for a client, and then the different channels represent projects where the different users should actually not have the same access, because there may be some confidentiality or some secret projects that are going on that not everybody should know about. So that's something to think about in terms of the privacy. Another good thing is, as I mentioned before, is if you keep all your conversations in your Microsoft team, you can search for all that information as long as it's not deleted. So with emails, you can do something similar, but if you've not been on an email in the first place, then you would not find it. In terms of circle of trust, So think about who should have access to the information. So this applies to people inside of the organization. Again, if somebody has access to a team, then they can see it. There's also organizational teams that are now rolled out, which we'll talk about in a second, but that basically means that anybody in the organization can access the data. So if it's something public to everybody, do you need a team for that? Versus is it something for just one of the business units? The other thing is if you're working with external users, so I mentioned before your client. So you want to give them the ability to email the channel. Now you can restrict it to say that only their domain can email that channel so that you're not going to get potentially spammed. Something else you might want to consider if you want to go down the route of giving them that email is creating something that is a little bit less cryptic, because by default, Microsoft Teams gives you a very cryptic email address. As you can see on the screen here, which is like 66, like just some sort of a random number at america.teams.ms. So this is a way for users to interact with the data or send data, and making sure that the data in the channel is only coming from the proper sources. I already alluded to the fact that there are what are called organizational-wide teams. So if you've got about 5,000 users or less in your organization, some organizations might be using Yammer. Some of them might look for something else to use across their organization for global messages. So you can create what are called a global team, which is available. All your admins are automatically the owners, and only they can post to the general channel on that team. And there is some controls you can set up for organization team where you cannot do @ mention, so that everybody in the team gets notified every time somebody types something, which is kind of like the reply all on emails that people often do. Bringing the teams closer together. So as I mentioned before, Skype for Business, if you're using Skype for Business and Microsoft Teams, start looking at, unless there's a compelling reason of why you are using Skype and not Teams, I would say start moving your meetings to Microsoft Teams. You can create, just like in Skype for Business, where you can create these ad hoc meetings for groups of people, you can do the same thing with Microsoft Teams. It essentially creates a meeting for you that is not connected to any team or any channel. But it gives you the added benefit of all these features I mentioned before for the video conferencing. Now, I mentioned the blurring, I mentioned the background. Those are only a couple of the things that are very, very nice in the Skype that is embedded inside of Microsoft Teams. But there's a few features that some of you may not be aware of that make this experience extremely compelling. First of all, there's something called automatic transcription and time coding. So if you're recording a video conversation, behind the scene, there is a service called Microsoft Stream, and it is essentially recording the conversation. It is transcribing all the conversations, and it actually can recognize who's speaking. And based on who's speaking, it's tagging the conversation, saying, okay, one person, Peter said this, and then Ian said that, and you can actually follow the conversation. It does real-time translation for you on the screen. So when people from different locations are speaking, they can also speak. They all speak as if they were in the same speaking the same language. And then it's also creating a connection between the video and the text, so that you can look at any text and it takes you back to the video, or when you scroll across through the video, it will take you back to the text. So it makes it a lot easier to use this video again for larger groups across different countries. Very, very powerful.
Now, what part is that? E5, is that part of the E3 or E5?
I believe Microsoft Teams is part of E3.
But what about that video the streaming transcription?
It's part of, so if you have Microsoft Stream available and enabled, that is part of the Microsoft Teams experience. Okay. Yeah, so as long as you have Microsoft Teams and Stream enabled, the Stream does a lot of this transcription for you, but it's the Microsoft Teams. So if it's available for you, then then you have those available. Not all those features have been fully rolled out yet. They're in the process, but look out for those. I know that the blurring is already available. I know that the transcription is already available. The real-time translation and the yeah, I think that's the only one that I'm not sure if it's fully rolled out, and the changing your background, but the other features are already there.
All right.
In terms of conversations on the go, so as I mentioned, you can use the conversations in terms of the text or the video conferencing on the mobile device. So rather than having to open up your Outlook email on your phone, and then you go to your Skype, and then go to your your Excel, your PowerPoint to review all of those, you can do all of that directly from your Microsoft team. So you don't have to go anywhere else. Feeding the conversation. So as I mentioned before, if you are looking for information and you need to know what's happening, rather than you having to go and go to Twitter and check out if there's any recent tweets or go to another system, why don't have the information come to you? And you can set up a specific channel. So if you're worried about not having a single channel inundated with information, you can just set up a specific channel with all your tweets or all your social media, and then have another channel which is going to be more around the actual conversations that are happening amongst team members. But the good thing about it is that, again, you're working in a single place rather than multiple locations. So those are some of the kind of the scenarios and best practices for communication. For collaboration, so I mentioned the tabs before. It's great for capturing some of the basic information that may be coming from different systems. What you can do is, similar to some SharePoint sites or other environments, you can actually create copies of teams, and you can move it over. So if you have project A and you want to now create a new project, you can actually copy a project over as a template. But there's a few things you will not get copied over, and that is the content, any customizations, and also for tabs, you need to do the configurations again. So the tabs will be there, but they just won't be configured. But this makes it a lot easier when you're trying to create project consistency, so that for those PMs on the call, if you're ever worried about not finding the information as you go from one project to another, this should alleviate your pain point. Taking notes. OneNote, as I mentioned, is great for that. Some of the functionality I talked about, where you're able to do some video recording and transcription, that actually exists in OneNote. It has existed for some time. So I do recommend, if you are using Notepad or some other forms to take notes, email you, consider using OneNote. It is fully integrated with Teams and allows you to some of that functionality as well. You can, as you can also see, I believe they haven't removed it, or they might have. But typically, when you create a team, one of the things you can have is a OneNote as well. Yeah, they might have removed it on this particular case. Let me see if I can switch over here to another one. I'll see if I can show an example. I'll just give this a minute. And while that's loading, okay. In terms of file sharing, so as I mentioned before, today, every team has its own SharePoint site or Office 365 group where all the documents are managed. Every channel has its own folder. That structure may be changing now that they're introducing private channels. But the good thing is that instead of storing files on a network drive or somewhere else, store them in the team. And you're going to get a lot of the benefits of SharePoint, which is all of your file versioning, so that everybody's working on the last version. You don't have to worry about people having access to documents that they shouldn't have access to. If, for whatever reason, you're working with other types of document sharing systems like Dropbox or Google Drive or Box, you can also integrate those ones directly into your team. So if I go in here, yeah, this one I also don't have access to. So I'm going to switch to my main one. So just bear with me for 1 second. In my main Microsoft team, where I'm not a guest, what you've seen right now is examples where I was a guest. So I was not able to do much. But if I go to my main one, it will let me do whatever I want. So that's where I can show you examples of the OneNote and of the documents. So just a second. Okay, that's going to take a minute. So I'm going to move ahead. So for notifications, so again, you can set up alerts or notifications or flows that will automatically send information from different systems into your team. So imagine, and you can see an example here that I did on the right, where I set up a flow that anytime somebody puts a document into a team, I want to be notified. So this could be an example where imagine you have a team with statement of works or proposals. Well, I want to be notified as soon as somebody puts the document because that's really important. I want to be able to, I want to know that I can follow up on it. So you can do a lot of that automation so that rather than you hunting for information, the information is coming to you. Let me see if this, if my team is now up. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so just very quickly here, if I wanted to go to add a tab, you can see over here I have a number of tabs. I can say OneNote, and you'll see it's going to give me a list of all the OneNotes available. There's a few of them. Okay, I'll let that load. Oh, here we go. So you can see, for example, here I can see I have a specific one. I want to bring this one and display it inside of the team. So this is now going to create a new tab for me over here, and you can interact with OneNote directly within the channel. And then the last thing is, and I like to call this the work-life balance feature in the app, which is there's something called setting your daily quiet hours. So anybody who's busy, anybody like me, my phone is constantly buzzing because I get all my messages coming in, notifications, etc. You can actually set up what are called quiet hours so that the phone is not going to give you any notifications. It's still capturing the notifications. It's just not sending you a live buzz or it doesn't ping you with the notification. But once you open up the app, you would still see all the notifications you've missed. That's in a nutshell in terms of what an overview on Microsoft Teams and how I have been using it in managing agile projects. Any questions?
No, I'm good. This is interesting. Very good. Here's a question regarding the Teams.
Yeah.
Quite often we're using conference tools like Join Me and GoToMeeting because we find that it gets installed in the browser very good. Like if I'm having a conference call with some guy across the road, he obviously needs to download Teams and install it in his computer, I'm assuming, doesn't he?
No, actually, you don't. You're able to use Microsoft Teams directly inside of the browser. So
okay,
you can bring up.
Right, because yeah, okay, so therefore that will avoid that whole. Because quite often it's just we always get this whole thing that it's been blocked and you have to download Teams in the browser.
Yeah, so there might be a small component that it needs to install just to use your camera, your audio device, but the actual client, the actual Teams client, doesn't need to be installed for accessing Teams and interacting with the system.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Okay. Good to know.
Yep. Any other questions that have been asked? Ivan? No? All right, let me just switch over. So what we'll do is now I'm going to open it up to a small raffle I created. So just bear with me a second here.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Great. Okay. Hi, guy behind the scenes. My name is Ivan Cullen, marketing manager for Soho Dragon. We have some questions in the chat
Sure.
before we move on. So let me go down the line from Naveen. We have, does Microsoft Project integrates well with Teams? I think we talked about that. So Naveen, hopefully you got your answer. If not, go ahead and chat us up. Let's go here. Mr. Steed, John Steed, can I download this for free?
Yeah.
What's the answer to that one?
Yes, absolutely. You can download it for free to try it out. Are you a current user of Office 365?
Well, I know I am.
No. For the individual, so you would need to have you'd be using it as part of Office 365. They're also looking at having essentially a free version of it, but it probably would be more limited in functionality.
Okay, great. That's awesome. So apparently next one, Naveen, no, it's part of the Sarah. This is really interesting. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us. Let me see. Sarah also wants to know, how do we get a developer's version?
So I don't know that there's a developer's version available, but there are, if you're wondering about the apps, the bots, the flows, all those configurations, customizations, there's actually, you don't need to have a developer version of Microsoft Teams. There's a whole development framework that is well documented by Microsoft, and you're able to use that framework to develop your own bots, your own information. So let me just quickly share my screen again.
Oh, we're seeing your screen, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, you are still seeing it?
Yep.
Okay.
So you were just on Teams a minute ago.
Yeah. So I'm just going back to it. So you should be able to see Teams again. So on the apps at the bottom, you'll see a little icon, and over here you can see all the different apps available. And then there is the what did they put it? They changed the interface. There's actually an option about creating your own. I'm just trying to see where it is now. There's that help center, but there is yeah, the link the link was moved. But there's an option to actually have here we go, upload custom app. So this is where you can upload your own, but there's a way to actually build them out directly. Inside of Teams, you can define a lot of the configurations, and then depending on the kind of service you're using, you'd be adding all the information and then upload the app to your team.
Also, in terms of interfacing with the API, you probably want to look at Microsoft Graph, and that will show you how to, say, create teams and create channels and add content.
So Microsoft Graph, so for those who may not be familiar, it's essentially some sort of an interface that is underlying for all the Office 365 products. And it allows you to interact with most of it, reading in information, making any changes, essentially managing those applications for you behind the scene. So to Peter's point, you can actually build bots, or you can build apps for your for Microsoft Teams that would interact with Microsoft Graph with all that information. If you're working with systems that are outside of Office 365, for example, my screen, you can see I've got Adobe, I've got Bitbucket, I've got a whole bunch of different systems. They don't have access to Microsoft Graph, but they have what is called an open API. So some sort of an interface that's different to Microsoft Graph, but it still allows the application to request data or to write data back into it. And that's essentially how you're building these applications.
And I know, real quick, for some reason, I think they lost the feed to your screen. You want to pop that on there one more time. And Peter, Sarah says,
sure.
Thank you for that that cool tidbit about graphs.
Yeah. Let me just see here. Screen share.
So guys, if you're listening, you're watching, go ahead, chat it up. We will respond to you for another quick minute before we go off air, but you can always go ahead and message us. Information will be followed up pretty soon.
Yeah, just make sure to leave about a minute or so. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, let me quickly switch over here as I'm sharing my screen. And what I would like everybody who's on the call to do is...
Well, look at this. You know, is this going to be a signed book?
Yeah, so anybody who's still on the call, so we're going to be raffling away a book. So I'm going to give you a link to go to. And if anybody can please go to it, just give it a second here.
Any reasons why you're not using forms on this, by the way?
No, this is using something called Power Apps. So
hang on, so you're using Power Apps. Does this go to a Power App?
That's right.
Okay, I thought Power Apps, you needed to be an authenticated Office 365 user to submit it.
Yeah, well, it's using a form. So if anybody can please go to this URL, it's case sensitive. So yes, that is going to be a form that is that people are going to be filling in to enter the raffle. And then once the information is in, what you're actually viewing, Peter, is the Power App.
Yep, and don't worry, we will post this link underneath in the description for the viewers to go ahead and enter. Definitely visit our website, sohodragon.myc, and our meetup page, which will be below. And I don't know, Peter, it's up to you.
Okay, great. I'm on the site right now. I'm on the page right now. So look forward to winning the prize. No, thank you very much. Haniel, pleasure as ever. Pleasure seeing you virtually and always in the flesh at the Speaking SharePoint Saturdays. Great topic on Teams, and we'll be doing our meetup next month in May. Ivan, what's the topic next month? Out of interest. Right now.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So next month we will be covering the wonders of Power BI.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Thanks, Ivan, and thank you, Haniel. Very cool presentation.
Thank you.